sorry, I have to sit so close to you because of the camera. Welcome everybody.
सानिया आप यहाँ आ जाइए.
I would like to introduce Dr. Syeda Saiyidain Hameed, who was born in Kashmir and currently resides in New Delhi, India. She holds a bachelor's from Delhi University, a master's from University of Hawaii, and a PhD from the University of Alberta. And since 1986 has authored more than 20 books and articles pertaining to women's religious minority rights in South Asia. She formerly served on the Planning Commission of the Indian government with responsibilities including health, women and children, and minority rights. Currently, she serves as Chancellor of the Maulana Azad National Urdu University in Hyderabad, a university committed to providing higher technical and vocational education to women in Urdu. In 2012, Syeda joined the Hunger Project's Global Board of Directors. And how fortunate we are that she comes annually to attend that meeting in New York and we get to see Syeda. Syeda's career demonstrates a long-standing commitment to sustainable development and the education of women. As a member of groups such as the Island Development Authority, she works to ensure the ecologically sound development of India's two major island chains. With the National Commission for Women, she worked to protect and improve safeguards provided to women under the Constitution of India, such as freedom from violence, harassment, discrimination. Making it a priority to be at the forefront of development, Syeda has been a founding member of a great number of rights and education groups, including the Muslim Women's Forum, where she advocates for legal literacy of Muslim women who wish to work with the government. The Women's Initiative for Peace in South Asia, an organization that empowers women as catalysts for a climate of peace through dialogue. South Asians for Human Rights, and the Center for Dialogue and Reconciliation. I have a brief list of her books, so those of you who are interested, these are all available on Amazon. We, the Raza family, claim a very close and a very deep relationship with Syeda's family, going back to 1935 when my parents met their family through her puppy, the great writer Saliha Abid Hussain, Misda Khala Jan to us. Syeda is Hali's great-great-granddaughter, and her father, Khwaja Ghulam Saiyidain, was the education minister under Mr. Nehru, and one of the most profound intellects that South Asia has ever produced. But one with a very deep connection to me because he was at Columbia and got an honorary PhD, which Columbia almost never gives to anyone. But he was one of those great recipients that did not honor Saiyidain Saab as much as Saiyidain Saab's name has honored Columbia University because of its attachment. And one of the most amazing things about him was his great sense of humor. Always had something so beautiful to say. Even when we were children, we were simply hypnotized by the charismatic and beautiful personality that he was, as you will see reflected in his daughter. And you've met, many of you have met Zakia, who is Sayyida's older sister, reflected in all of Saiyidain Saab's children. Most importantly for us, my sister Bibi, Amra, hiding in the back, and Syeda were together in Edmonton for many years as students and then growing up. So Bibi was very close to Syeda for many years as Syeda was raising a young family, and she's still very close to them. And I think that it is thanks to Bibi that Syeda always comes to Azra Mahal, whether Azra Mahal is in Harlem or on the west side or on the east side. Syeda has been to all my apartments, I think. Welcome, Syeda. We welcome you back warmly and really look forward to this evening. Earlier this year, I was in Pakistan with my brother Tasneem and his wife Nazli, my sister Atya. We were returning at Karachi International Airport. I was looking through the bookstore as usual, piling up books in a cart, and came across Born to be Hanged. It had just been released. I bought it, and on the flight back, I finished it. It was simply, you couldn't put it down. And after I finished this book, as soon as I landed, in fact, before I landed, I wrote to Syeda a paragraph, which I'm going to read to you as my review of this book. Dearest Syeda, I wanted to let you know how much I admired your research and the book on Bhutto. I literally read it in one sitting because I found it so gripping. Bhutto's was a Greek tragedy, as you so aptly pointed out. Through reading your incredibly well-written and empathetic account of his last years, for the first time I realized the impossible conditions he was forced to live under while in jail. For a man born with a golden spoon to die surrounded by such wretched ignominy was one of the saddest things I have ever read. It left me disturbed and reminded me of this शेर by Mir. जिस सर पे गुरूर आज है या ताजवरी का. That head which is proudly held high wearing a crown today. जिस सर पे गुरूर आज है या ताजवरी का, कल उस पे यही शोर है फिर नौहागरी का. Today that crown lies amongst lamentations and weeping and sorrow. These are the ways of our cruel world, mourned by poets and philosophers for centuries. But to see it unfold in a man one knew and met and responded to emotionally was a very different experience for me. Thank you for doing something which we Pakistanis ourselves have not had the talent to do. The painful research you conducted is all too apparent. I am deeply impressed and very proud of you. Congratulations, Syeda. And before I turn over the mic to her, your sister Zakia would say कि खू से लाचार थे, कुछ वाज भी फरमाए गए, खू से लाचार हैं हम, एक शेर सुनाना ज़रूरी है. I am a big admirer of Syeda for many, many reasons, but one of them is that this is a woman who is leading a life which is deeply committed to scholarship. This is what Syeda does. She has an exquisitely sensitive heart. She has taken on so many social, humanitarian, philanthropic projects. But in addition to all those things, she is a serious scholar. Just look at the range of books she has written, from Maulana Azad to Sarmad to Bhutto to all kind, My Beautiful Country. I mean, the range, the spectrum is incredible. And to me, there is that kind of commitment to anything that you love and have a passion for is something which is very inspiring. So I would like to pay tribute to Syeda in the words of one of my favorite poets, Emily Dickinson, whose poetry I have decided to commit to memory these days. So at the drop of a hat, I'm quoting Emily Dickinson these days. Here is something I think is very fitting for Syeda. I had no time to hate because the grave would hinder me. I had no time to hate because the grave would hinder me, and life was not so ample I could finish enmity. How How beautiful is that? I had no time to hate because the grave would hinder me, and life was not so ample I could finish enmity. Nor had I time to love. This life is just not long enough for anything. Hate, enmity, love, no. Nor had I time to love, but since some industry must be, the little toils of love I thought were large enough for me. The toils of your love, we congratulate you. We offer you our deepest respect and admiration for what you do. Congratulations. Welcome. Just get a glass of water. A glass pani. Please.
Friends, it's very difficult to even try to follow the words of Azra. But I'll just begin by just saying two small things. First, I want to say that I have never read my book before such a glittering audience. So thank you very much. And most overwhelmed. And that's not so much my anything to do with me. It's the fact that Azra is that kind of an institution here. When she calls, I mean, people do try to put things aside and come. So I'm really, really very moved and very grateful. And I also want to add, make one correction to what Azra said, and that is that my friendship with Amira predates that stint in Alberta when we were together in Hawaii, which were, right Amra? In 65, 63, or anyway we overlap, but Hawaii is a common factor. And so Amira and I go back. So both of us have lived in Hawaii. Yeah, but maybe just overlapping. The other thing I wanted to say was that this family, the Raza family, is of course that she has already given that background. But to me, Zahir Khalajan, we used to call her mother, was very much, embedded in the people who we held dearest. So there she is, looking just there in her white sari.
My mom.
So beautiful and very much a part of my earliest memories, and especially connected with somebody that I loved a lot, and that was her best friend. So having said that, I think I have said everything I wanted to in the book. So maybe if you wouldn't mind, and if Azra permits, I'd like to just read two little excerpts from the book, which I think would give the flavor for those of you who are hearing for the first time. And then we can talk about why I wrote this book and what prompted me, and why an Indian writing about Pakistan, and why an Indian writing about a person, and why Born to be Hanged. All those questions can then follow. So let me just begin by reading two little excerpts. So I'm reading an excerpt of the hanging of Mr. Bhutto, which is towards the last 50 pages of the book. The place reeked of old dampness. A single bulb showed the rope that hung still in the dead night. The hangman stood at the side of the platform with his eyes on the two men walking carefully on either side of the prisoner. Carefully, not touching him. The prisoner's cap covered only his forehead, throwing in relief the nose and the chin. He wore canvas shoes which made no sound. The two men turned back and left him alone on the platform with Tara Masih, the hangman. Both men stood face to face. A few shadows shuffled awkwardly near the walls. Silence. There was no sound except the rustle of the rope being twisted by the calloused hands of the hangman. He held the noose near the prisoner's neck, who made no effort to veer away. More rustling. 1 second. 2, 3. Time ticked on. Suddenly a voice, at once familiar and unfamiliar, tore through the dark silence. "Oh scum, hurry!" The next moment, the earth moved with a shudder and shattered under the ground. The wooden plank opened its trap, and the newly twisted rope wrenched out the last breath of the man who once walked tall in the politics of Pakistan. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was hanged on 4th of April, 1979. The wood crashed into the pit. 6 pairs of eyes watched the motion. 6 pairs of ears heard the horrible cracking of the bones. Did his closed eyes bulge beneath the eyelids? No one knew, because the form disappeared in the pit of darkness. The hour was 2:30 a.m. when the devout wake up for Tahajjud prayers. Someone may have been offering prayers in the barracks. Close by, in the presidential palace, a man in uniform, his eyes lined with kohl, waited for the phone to ring. At last, the faithful servant had killed his Mohsin through a web of lies and deceit. A woman and a girl sat still in a room nearby, dreading the ring of the phone. Old friends were now scattered all over the country, and the world had not slept a wink. Some were silently praying. Praying for what? A miracle? A divine intervention? And finally, in 2015, while I was browsing in his library, I came across a small section of poems written by several Urdu poets during the few weeks following the hanging. Few weeks when the collective shock and grief had gripped the common people. The title of this small poem is Rassi, rope. एक रस्सी अल्लाह की और एक रस्सी तुम्हारी, एक रस्सी अल्लाह की और एक रस्सी तुम्हारी। अल्लाह की रस्सी को मजबूती से थामना रहमतों और बरकतों का इनाम है, और तुम्हारी रस्सी ज़बान और आँखें बाहर निकाल देती है, लेकिन कद लंबा हो जाता है। One rope of Allah, one rope of yours. Hold firmly Allah's rope. It is a reward of compassion and benediction. In your rope, tongue and eyes, it thrusts out, but it increases the height. So that's by
Syeda, can
reading.
I request you to read because the introduction about the Greek parallel.
Yes,
That is
that's
so
very
beautiful.
good.
That's very good.
That's fascinating.
And I would like to.
अच्छा यहाँ रख सकते हैं।
Prophetic, Victoria, he was born to be.
It's a very short prologue that I've written to this, but I won't read the whole. I'll just read as much as Azra wants me to read. So I begin by quoting from Oedipus the King. This was Sophocles' play written in the 5th century BC. O my children, where are you? For you too I weep, though I cannot see your faces, knowing the bitter life men will make for you in the days to come. And then Oedipus, self-blinded, addressing his children in Sophocles' Oedipus the King. As a student of literature, I've always thought of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto as the protagonist of a Greek tragedy. Parallels abound in the stories of Zulfikar of Larkana and Oedipus of Thebes. Oedipus had 4 children, 2 sons, Eteocles and Polynices, and 2 daughters, Antigone and Ismene. Zulfikar had 4 children, 2 sons, Mir Murtuza and Shehnawaz, and 2 daughters, Benazir and Sanam. Oedipus, when he came to know the truth of his patricide and incest, blinded himself and went into self-imposed exile. Zulfikar, when he realized his flawed judgment and personal hubris, was already held in a vice which a virulent regime turned into the noose, finally ending him. Oedipus's sons fought over his kingdom and slew each other. Polynices was refused burial by the state. Zulfikar's son met a similar end. Murtuza was bullet showered as he was driving into his own house, and Shehnawaz was poisoned far away from home. The assailants of both remain untraced to date. Oedipus's daughter, Antigone, was sent to death by her uncle Creon for disobeying the law of Thebes. Zulfikar's daughter Benazir was assassinated on her way back from a public meeting. Both men, larger than life, are victims despite epitomizing qualities which are the antithesis of victimhood: self-confidence, masterfulness, and intensity. The Greeks would say they were cursed by the gods, ensnared by fate. Their self-destruction resulted from an imbalance in the humors of which they were made. 7,000 years later, what would we say about our protagonist? The tragic sagas of Antigone and Benazir reverberate through the generations. Sophocles in his drama has immortalized Antigone. A parallel piece needs to be written on Benazir. Polynices and Murtuza have remained unsung, but that is another story for another time. And if you will permit me, since we are talking of the title, why is it Born to be Hanged? Why did I call it Born to be Hanged? And this is a story which is about Sir Maurice James, who was Britain's High Commissioner in Islamabad in the 1960s. He had worked with Mr. Bhutto closely, and he had written about Mr. Bhutto, and these lines, as I think somebody said just now, turned out to be very prophetic. And these are his lines. This is Sir Maurice James writing, there was, how shall I put it, a rank odor of hellfire about him. It was a case of corruptio optimi pessima, which is corruption in the best is the worst of all. I believe that at heart he lacked a sense of dignity and value of other people. His own self was what counted. I sensed him in ruthlessness and a capacity for ill-doing which went far beyond what was natural. Now these are his views. Ultimately we don't agree with them, but the lines that I wanted to quote were not this, but these 4 lines. Maurice James's last sentence, this is absolutely the last excerpt I'll read. Maurice James's last sentence, like the oracle at Delphi, defines the tragedy that flows from this flaw. And I quote, despite his gifts, I judged that one day Bhutto would destroy himself. When and how, I could not tell. In 1965,
I so reported in one of my last dispatches from Pakistan as British High Commissioner. I wrote by way of clinching that Bhutto was born to be hanged. 14 years later, that was what turned out to be. Unquote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Syeda. And we are very fortunate to have at least two individuals, maybe even more, who have had personal associations with Mr. Bhutto at very close level. I'm going to ask both of them to initiate this conversation with you now. The first would be Satya and Ayatullah. Satya, it will be such an honor for us if you come and sit here and give us a few words about your association with Mr. Bhutto, and please ask whatever questions you would like to begin. And then we will bother, of course, Ambassador Rafat Mehdi, who was...
You can ask a few questions
Yes, we will.
instead of...
Thank you so much. I am deeply, deeply grateful to you, Azra, for giving this opportunity to all of us, and particularly me, to be beside this great woman. And I'm saying great in an honest form sense, because what you have told us about her career is outstanding. And may God be with you. And may you continue to do your good work. I don't want to hold you between the illustrious audience. And all I would like to say to you at this time, I did see history being made. I was, of course, much younger, but I think I had 2 eyes and 2 ears and 1 mouth, which listened, saw, but talked less. And I think maybe that was because of my youth and my age. I've had the honor of knowing the Bhutto family and being a friend of Nusrat Bhutto, more than Nusrat, her sister Bheja. So I have, as Azra has just said, walked with them during their time in Pakistan and as the Prime Minister in Islamabad, when my husband was a civil servant at that time. And there are just so many memories, so many moments, so many occasions which were familiar and related to the family. But then he would always look at me, and it's very interesting that, as you've said, he had that towering personality. He was also a very women friendly, and he wanted to see women out there doing things. And he was one of the people who, very quietly, he would never make a show of it. The Vadera side of him was very apparent with men, but with women, it was a gentle, quiet, timely interventions that if he thought a woman could do something, or a girl, or whatever, he would quietly do it without making a show of us, which left a dent in a foundation which was anti-woman at that time. Regarding Ziaul Haq, it's interesting for me now when I look in hindsight. I was a part of his cabinet. And I was looking after, at that young age, I was basically, my field is population demography, social demography, and I was looking after a family planning movement which was extremely difficult in those times. I remember, and I will stop here because I think that we need the question and answers more than listening to me, but I just want to share with you that at the time that Ziaul Haq Sahab took over, he called me and he said that, you know, you came to me when I was the Chief of Army Staff, and you said, you talked to me about the population issue and how important it was for Pakistan and Pakistan's future. Now I am the president, and will you come and join my team and help me? And to cut a long story short, I said, sir, I cannot come until you have taken a decision regarding Mr. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, because you have no government till then. there is a total preoccupation and obsession with what is going to happen. So he said to me, I thank you for your honesty, and I want to ask you what you think about it, about Mr. Bhutto. And I said in one line that Bhutto dead will be worse for the country and for the people of Pakistan than Bhutto alive. Thank you.
Remember we were together in 71 when Mr. Bhutto came for the UN session.
Of course, of course. When the Polish
resolution was
papers were all torn up. Do you want to talk about that?
Of course.
मैं-
Thank
मैं
you
यहीं
so
से बैठ
much.
के
आप
बोल
यहाँ
रहा
से आ जाए, आप यहाँ जाइए because there's mic.
ये जाएगा नहीं. आप
नहीं, मैं
रफत
यहीं
इधर
से-
आ
हाँ,
जाए.
आवाज़ आ जाएगी।
आवाज कुर्सी आगे कर ली.
रफत जरूर बताइए. That was a very traumatic experience for all of
Thank
us.
you very much. As part of this glittering audience, I would like to say that we feel very privileged to be in your company tonight. What I was going, I had a few questions in mind. I was lucky to have a copy of your book, thanks to Azra. But there were many claimants for the book, so it was taken away by my illustrious daughter-in-law. So I read a few pages, but I had a few questions to ask you. But before that, I just mentioned to Atiya, we were together when this 1971, the Bangladesh crisis took place. And the way he handled the situation was really remarkable. And it was a very difficult time, crisis for Pakistan, for him also. I don't know, Atiya, if you were there in the meeting with the Pakistani community in the mission. He was speaking in the mission when somebody, one of the Pakistanis there, misbehaved. So he was rude to Mr. Bhutto, and Mr. Bhutto got annoyed and he went up to the ambassador's room. In a way, he walked out of the meeting. I was the junior most officer then in the mission, so I had nothing at stake. So he went into the ambassador's room and the room was closed. And all his other associates like Rafi Raza, Hafiz Pirzada, Agha Shai and others, they were all standing outside because nobody could go in. I opened the door and went in. And suddenly I saw that he was facing the door. And I got scared, I just closed the door. And as I was closing the door, he said, "Come in." So I went in and he said, "Who are you?" So I said, "Sir, I am so-and-so, Vice Consul here." And then he started saying that these people do not know what I am going through. I have not been able, my country is being dismembered. I have not been able to talk to anyone. The only person that I have spoken to is Mustafa Khan, just to get an account. I have not had anything to eat since morning. And the Soviet ambassador is coming to meet me or whatever. Then he came back, he was very gracious. And I'll just quote another example to show how gracious, although he had a personality which was towering. And one was a little nervous in his company, especially for us as a very junior diplomat. In one of the hotels in New York, the last day of his stay here, in a very well-known hotel here, the manager comes up and says that we are sorry that your Prime Minister's 2 suits have been burned while ironing. So we thought this has never happened. And he said, yes, it has never happened, but it happened. So I said, then it's very difficult for us to convey to the Prime Minister. So in case he had that valet, Nur Muhammad Mughal, you remember? His name appears and said, I don't know if it appeared in but he was very close to the Prime Minister. So we tried to persuade Mr. Nur Muhammad Mughal to go and inform the Prime Minister that this has happened. But he said, why should I go? Because the manager has informed you. So you should go. So we tried to persuade him as much as we could. So then I thought the best thing is just to tell Mr. Mughal to go and tell the Prime Minister that the manager wants to meet him. So Nur Mohammad Mughal agreed. And he went in and told the Prime Minister that we said the general manager instead of the manager, just to increase his importance. So after about 5-10 minutes, he comes to me, Nur Mohammad Mughal, the valet, that the Prime Minister is calling you. So I said I wanted to avoid it, and it is still happening to me. So I thought that Mr. Bhutto, when I went in, would be enraged, because two of his suits, and his suits were not ordinary. I mean, he was a very well-dressed gentleman. I went in, he was very calm, no anger, no nothing on his face. And as I walked in, and the first thing he said, "Are you fond of music?" So I said, what is the connection between music and suits being burned and the general manager? So I said, in any case, the Prime Minister asked the question. Even if I was not fond of music, I would have said yes. So I said, yes, sir, I am. So he said, do you know of a good music store, musical instrument? So I said, yes, sir, Sam Goody. I remembered that. Whatever, I just said, say Sam Goody. So there was an envelope lying on the table, and he had not even touched it, and he just said that, can you just take this envelope, and my son, you know, Shahnawaz, it's his birthday, whatever the day, and he has been after my life to get some musical instrument. I don't know what does he want. Can you call him up, talk to him, and find out, and then get him the music, and whatever the difference is, just let my military secretary know, and then he'll make up. So he showed no anger, his mood was perfect. He was leaving for Pakistan in the next 2-3 hours. So he was a very gracious person. After that, I would ask you for a few questions, if you permit, please. Number one, of course, are the number of questions that you mentioned yourself. What was the motivation behind this book that you decided to write? And I read somewhere that you had never met Mr. Bhutto. And you did a lot of work in Lahore, the research work. I mean, part of it, of course, is your research, and then a lot has been drawn also in your meetings with Dr. Mubashir Hassan, a very credible resource for you, and also very close to the Prime Minister, to Mr. Bhutto. But my question to you is, were you able to meet other associates of Mr. Bhutto, like Mr. Pirzada or Rafi Raza or Firoz Kaisar, or all those who were with them, Mustafa Khan? That is question number one. Question number two is that in the book, I did read something about a mercy petition, the family mercy petition. I would like to know a little more about it, because I will then tell you the reason why I asked you is because I know that the government was interested, and you would know, yeah, the government wanted Mr. Bhutto to sign a mercy petition for President General Ziaul, and he refused. He said no, he wouldn't sign it under the laws. So the government did send I'm not saying that the government would have agreed to it. I think most probably it was a ploy, just to say that, okay, he did appeal for mercy, and I said no. So might be this was done for that. But did you come across that the fact that there was an interest by the government to have a mercy petition signed? There was another question which just slipped my mind, but I will
maybe later.
Back to you and ask you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you for sharing that very lovely story. It humanized him for us. As a father, as somebody who doesn't hold any anger and grudges. Please.
So I'll just try to very briefly summarize why, first of all, why Bhutto, why me, why a person from India writing about a personality like Mr. Bhutto. And I start my book. I read you the prologue, but I started off by saying, I lived for 20 years with a man I never met. So that's really what happened. I started the work 20 years ago, and I'll tell you why I started it, but I'll also tell you why 20. Because for 10 years, while I was member planning commission in 2 consecutive terms, this project got into the back burner. But it never really went into cold storage. It was always there simmering. If I met someone, if I saw someone, anything, it was always something which was in my heart that it had to be done. So that's where my, my face-to-face with, when I saw the lapis bhutto, the painting which I saw in Rinva Bhutto's house in 73 Clifton or 72? 73. 73 Clifton, in his daughter-in-law's house, Murtuza's house, which was his house. It was like it was a lapis bhutto done by Gulji, Ismail Gulji, the artist who had done it and who was subsequently, he and his wife were both murdered in Karachi. But it was like I had seen the man, a man you have lived with, and suddenly you see this absolutely fascinating. I wanted that to be the cover of my book, but then my publisher said, no, put something which people will easily recognize. Anyway, so why I wrote this? I wrote it because essentially I got hold of the materials, files, papers, letters written by Mr. Bhutto from the prison. And I got hold of 17 letters that he wrote, and that prison cell must have been very badly lit. There must have been a very difficult, this was not the death cell, this was the earlier imprisonment that he was thrown into prison earlier by Ayub. It was an extremely difficult circumstance, but the letters were like gems. The handwriting ran straight. The lines were straight, the writing was small, but it was so beautifully written. Not more than half a dozen words were cut out, all longhand, and it was, the man's mind worked like some kind of a precision instrument. And I was absolutely stunned by the quality of that man's mind, who could have written, and letters to his associates, Rafi Raza, Mubashir Hassan, Mustafa Khar, J. Rahim, scolding them, getting angry with them, directing them, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, you don't consult me. It was like a general commanding his army from within the prison. And all through a person who he regarded as his mole. Now that story of the mole is so hilarious, you may remember that, which is that when there was a man who was his sort of, a prisoner used to be attached to VIP prisoners who do the menial work. So this person was attached to him. So when Mr. Bhutto entered the prison, like back in that time, 100 rupees was a lot of money. He just threw 100 rupees like that. And the man crawled to get that 100 rupees. And so Mr. Bhutto said, he's my mole. So this man then became the courier of the letters. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth he went. And finally, then one day Mr. Bhutto asked for a bottle. And everyone knew what the bottle meant. But they were not sure if they could send booze to him in the prison through this, because you really don't know where the intelligence is. So they were dithering, his friends, Mustafa Khar, Rafi Raza, Peer Zada, Mubashir Hassan, they were all not certain. To make a long story short, when Mr. Bhutto formed the government and Mustafa Khar became the governor of Punjab, he called this man and he said, now tell me, what was the story? And it turned out to be that he was in fact a man of the intelligence. So the great feudal did not realize that his mole was in fact an informer. The kind of things, Dr. Mubashir told me that once he had gone to see him, this is towards the end of that whole episode, post 1971, and he had gone to see him in a hotel room, and being an engineer, he was looking around, and suddenly he saw something, and he took it out and he showed it to Begum Nusrat. And he said, do you know what this is? You are the Prime Minister, this is your Prime Ministerial suite, and here is a bugging device. So Begum Nusrat said, yes, there's something like that. Murtuza was showing there's something like that on near his phone also. So the whole, the intelligence apparatus was all around him. It was, like the feudals in a sense were, extremely powerful. They were swaying the masses. He was a darling of the masses. When he spoke, people just swayed to his speeches. And he spoke in a mixture of, I'm sure you know better than I do, Atiyaji knows better than I do, that with Punjabi, Sindhi, little bit of Hindi, and people just loved it. And all they could say was Jiye Bhutto. And they used to go and break into a bhangra. And finally, Bhutto Sahib had to say, now stop it and let me carry on. He was a man who mesmerized the masses. So these were the things which really fascinated me. And I tried to reflect that in the book. So in terms of why I wrote it, because if I had not brought that correspondence into this book, if I had not done the file notings, if I had not gone through those papers, I'm not sure whether they would ever have seen the light of day. And I was so nervous that here I was with all these precious materials, working on them, bringing them to Delhi, working, and so I was terrified that one day in the border they'll open my luggage and they'll find this. And finally, when I finished it, I made a packet of them and I sent them to Begum Ghanba Bhutto for safekeeping in the most beautiful library in 73 Clifton. So they are back where they belong. At least people have a chance to look at them. And I also it was a great. Very nice for me that she opened her library for me and I was able to glean a little bit, not enough. A lot more work needs to be done. But at least I had an opportunity to do that. So that's some part of what you asked.
Thank you. Raza would want to ask.
आपको ये दे?
So I'll just give you a brief background. I met Bhutto the first time in 1969 in Lahore when he established Pakistan People's Party in the early days, and he had organized a student meeting for 150 students, and I happened to be there. And I attended almost all of his speeches in Lahore, Lailpur, Jhelum in that period of time when he was fighting against Ayub Khan. I became so mesmerized by him that my family used to call me R. Bhutto. He was like a god to us. But I have the question I have from you, that kind of personality that I looked up to and looked forward to, and he made the worst mistakes when he was in power, particularly to declare Ahmadis as non-Muslims. I think it's one of the greatest tragedy of Pakistan, and Bhutto brought that up. To appease the Muslim Islamic parties, he made decisions which have really hurt Pakistan ever since. And of course the greatest decision that hurt us was Ziaul Haq, who destroyed everything and brought the fundamentalism. So then how do you place him in history, in historical terms, a man with such intelligence, such power, such mesmerizing qualities, and yet he messed up?
Dr. Saab, you've answered in a way your own question, which is a very good question. And I think that is really the tragedy of Mr. Bhutto. Before that, I want to just touch on something the ambassador just asked. When I started writing this book, number of these people except Rahim were alive. But by the time I really got seriously into it, the only 2 people or 3 people that I spoke to, one of them being, of course, Dr. Mubashir Hassan, who stayed with me throughout, and the other one was Ghulam Mustafa Kar. And I have a whole chapter on my meeting with him. It was a very, very interesting meeting with him. And he's very attractive and still at his age, you know, an extremely bright and anyway, totally what I read from Tehmina Durrani's book, I thought, my God, what kind of a person am I going to see? But he turned out to be completely a different sort of a person. But sir, to coming back to Dr. Saab's question about, the kind of, this is what I also found that so fascinating, that he used to wear civil row suits and silk scarves and the best of shoes, like you said. His suits must have cost a bomb. And then he gave up and he went into Awami suits and that whole transformation, and sometimes just let himself get wet in the rain, threw away his jacket, all those dramatic gestures, but spoke for 2 hours, for 2.5 hours at length. And the man to the right and the man to the left, they would not stop exclaiming their ecstasy. You were a very young man then, and I don't know whether you went up to the stage or not, but that kind of a orator who could stand in United Nations and talk about small countries and shame the United Nations for the fact that there is not a concern, there is not an empathy, there is not a sensitivity for small countries, in absolutely uncompromising words. I mean, for me, living in India, to have a Pakistani stand in the United Nations and talk about what India has done to Nagaland and Mizoram, nobody knows the name of Nagaland. These are northeastern states that have been fighting against the Indian state for for their identity. So his depth, his breadth of knowledge, he could express that. And finally, that news clip, I've seen it so many times from the file, when he tears up the papers, he throws them, and he said, I will have nothing to do with the United Nations, I'm leaving. And he storms out. And in my book, I have not quoted the whole, I mean, the speeches were very long, but I have quoted many excerpts. And I was also, unfortunately, my book was always reviewed by retired foreign secretaries. So, and that at least 3 of those reviews were like, they were always thinking that I'm kind of gone too much in his, why am I becoming so mesmerized by his, but my God, I mean, the records are all there. And to be able to level with United Nations, that was the quality of the man. And yet the wrong judgments that he made, the Ahmadiyas, the decision about the Ahmadiyas to please the fundamentalist, the right-wing lobby, that is the compromise that he made. And according to his friends and his close associates like Dr. Mubashir Hassan and Mustafa Kar, that was his, in a way, that was one of the, it was like a nail in the coffin. The fact that he began to compromise, that he began to sort of, shut down the bars, stop drinking, trying to make Pakistan sort of the Islamic state, paving the way for Ziaul Haq. In fact, Ziaul Haq was such a, like there is so many incidents about how obsequious Ziaul Haq was to him. And that once there was some dirt on his shoe, so Ziaul Haq went and started cleaning the shoe. So this was related to Dr. Mubashir Hassan. So he didn't believe it. He said, really, did Ziaul Haq do it? Okay, now, so he told his interlocutor, what did Bhutto Saab do? So he said, what did he do? He put his other foot forward to clean it. He said, yes, that's my Bhutto. He must have done that.
I'd like to make a comment and then ask for another question. We have a very deep family connection with Mr. Bhutto. So we are, as the Raza family, we are not at all rational about him. We are emotional about the family. So whatever comes from us is because we love the family. And the reason is that Sir Shahnawaz Bhutto, who is Mr. Zulfikar Bhutto's father, was a frequent visitor to our house in the early post-partition days, because my father was in the Ministry of Rehabilitation, and he was responsible for giving the custodianship for people who had lost their properties. And so all of Sir Shahnawaz's cases my father solved. And he used to bring the young Zulfikar Bhutto and made my father a patron father, surrogate father to Mr. Bhutto, and told him that always take care of Zulfi. Many years passed, and then at the end of my father's career, he got into some bureaucratic mishaps or problems with his with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with the Ministry of Rehabilitation, that was not doing justice to what my father had contributed. And he went to speak to Mr. Bhutto about it, to say that how unfair this whole thing is happening. And immediately Mr. Bhutto said, you are, Ali Raza, you are not staying another minute in that ministry. You are moving to Ministry of Foreign Affairs tomorrow. That's what happened. He moved my father to Foreign Affairs. My mother was kicking and screaming to Islamabad. She didn't want to move. But we moved because Mr. Bhutto demanded that my father just be with him. And I think he took you to meet Mr. Bhutto at his home. So we were kind of a very emotional attachment to Mr. Bhutto, and Benazir was always extremely nice to us also because of her father. So I have to say that don't go by our rational decisions or judgments on Mr. Bhutto, but we love the family, and he was simply the most charismatic person that I have ever met in my entire life. And so now I wanted to ask someone younger to step in, and the best political scientist here, of course, is Dr. Farah Jan, who has finished her PhD in political science at Rutgers University and is now teaching at University of Pennsylvania. So Farah, come here and you make a comment and ask the question.
Sure. So I have to admit, I haven't read the book in its entirety, but the first section of your book, when you talk about Prime Minister Bhutto, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and his early life, where he was born, his family, I think the one thing that stands out for us who know him as Prime Minister, not the person who he was before, the letter that he wrote to Quaid-e-Azam. If you could talk a little bit about that for those who've not read it. That letter actually stands out. You don't have kids writing letters like that. With the focus on, being a good Muslim in that. And that theme then continues in the later 70s when he was in power, and the Ahmadiyya ruling that came with it. One thing that I'd like to add, and I haven't read the book completely, so I don't know what is in the later sections, but you asked the question of the 70s when he was in power, and why did he take this step? Bhutto Sahab was very much looking forward to Bhutto Sahab was very much looking forward to reaching out to the Middle Eastern states. And that was a step for him to prove to the Saudis that he's a good Muslim. The Islamization that he initiated and then Zia took over was more, all of those were, signals that they wanted to send to get the Saudis to invest more in Pakistan and support Pakistan diplomatically, politically, on their stance against India. And I think it was more not his own doing, not something that he wanted to do, but more to please the Saudis. Thank you.
I remember that's a very, very good connection that you have made. But in that, I just remembered that Iqbal Ahmed was narrating an incident to me when there was a huge jalous of Mr. Bhutto on May Day on, what is that, Lahore, the main road in Lahore? The mall. And the Nara at that time, the slogan was, Asia Surkh hai, Asia surkh hai. So, you know, that whole thing about South Asia is red, you know, that his left, the whole left-leaning, the left ideology, and remember Mubashir and Rahim were confirmed leftists, and that intellectual group, some were sitting in the middle, but these two were confirmed. So I think that whole thing took a sea change. And as you said, that trying to bring Pakistan, first it was the Hardis and the laborers and the cultivators and land distribution and land ceilings, and then slowly coming to a point of declaring the Ahmadis as non-Muslims, coming closer to the ideology, and first hosting the 1974 Islamic Summit, where 35 or 37 heads of Islamic State, and for the first time, Mujibur Rahman came to that. And when the two leaders embraced after Bangladesh, it was a historic moment when that happened in Gaddafi Stadium or somewhere,
and
wherever
the
this was
Saudis
held.
requested.
Yeah, right. So, Saudis were, So I think that, but in a sense, he had prepared the ground where Ziaul Haq, then he struck. And I still remember there's an incident where you talked about a mercy petition. And of course, at the end, there was a mercy petition by his sister. She had actually done the mercy petition.
He refused to sign.
His first wife?
Amir Begum, she sort of disappears from the scene. I never hear about her again. But Dr. Mubashir had gone to see Ziaul Haq to plead for the last, like it was like almost at the end, maybe January or so, just few months before Mr. Bhutto was hanged. And he said that he went in there, he got an appointment, he went, he sat, and of course Ziaul Haq very nicely greeted him, so on, so forth. Orange juice was served. It was such a graphic description. And so he drank his juice in one gulp, Ziaul Haq, and said, Dr. Sahab, zara namaz padh lein. Let me say my prayers. And the two journals got up and they said their namaz and all that. And then they came and sat, and meanwhile he was sitting there, he'd also come out of jail and so on, in a very bad condition himself. And then he said to him that, he said, sir, the same thing as you said, that his alive or his dead, what would be better? And this, so he said that, Mr. Bhutto alive would be, Mr. Bhutto dead would be a worse fate for Pakistan. At that time, Ziaul Haq's words were, I'm saying it in Urdu and then I'll translate it. Dr. Sahab, मैं अपने मोहसिन को कैसे मार सकता हूँ? How can I kill my benefactor? And then his sentence was, at that sentence, I knew the man had lied. So that was for him that was the closing. So I also say that, what we see, Pakistan, India for that matter, India is not in a much better condition at all. You know what's happening in India, it's all very evident. But I think it's like a country which kills its father. It's very, very difficult to recover from that. The patricide part of it is something which is very, very difficult to recover. And I think to this day, as somebody who's working for Pakistan-India relations, and we've just come back from the Wagah border commemorating Asma Jahangir and Kuldeep Nayyar, and I can say that we are all this after shocks of this, like it's a huge catastrophic occurrence that the country has not been able to recover from, and I don't know when it's going to happen. We also killed our father, and now another power is trying to appropriate Gandhi, which is absolutely the most hypocritical conditions that are prevailing. But the fact remains that these South Asian countries, they've really written their own destiny with a very bloody hand.
On the mercy petition, there was a mercy petition sent to him to sign.
Yeah, from the sister and
No, from the government.
oh, I had.
That I know. for a
Okay,
fact.
okay.
I have
And the-
one other question.
And he refused to sign.
Oh yes, he had absolutely told them he didn't want.
said he's
No,
really not
no,
signed.
right. And even he told his sister that I don't want. His sister, his lawyer, 3 or 4 people went with the mercy petition, and he had said, I don't want a mercy petition. You will not appeal to Ziaul Haq for mercy.
In fact, when the person went to him for the mercy petition that the government has sent it to be signed, Mr. Bhutto said, do you know me? So he said, yes sir, Mr. Zulfikar, do you know my father's name? He said, yes, Mr. Shahnawaz Bhutto. Do you know Ziaul Haq's father's name? He said, no, I don't know. He said, you want Ziaul Haq, I mean to sign a petition and ask for mercy from Ziaul Haq? Take it back. I won't sign it.
Come here.
Yes. Why
Now,
don't you-
why don't you come here? I'm actually going to ask one last question, then I'm done. During your research for this book, did you come across any correspondence between Prime Minister Bhutto and the Middle Eastern leaders, whether it was Gaddafi or King Faisal or others in the region? And what
No,
was
no.
the sort of
Yasser Arafat.
and Yasser Arafat?
No, I didn't come across any. My work was mostly on the Islamic Summit, not personal
And
correspondence.
any
no.
motivations for the summit? Like, why was he? He was very thrilled about the summit. This was something that took pride in. What was the motivation behind that?
I think this is from.
And
Yeah, I'm just that very briefly. Mr. Bhutto was a natural head of all the Islamic countries of the world, and he saw that his stature as that. After his performance in the United Nations, after standing up for all the countries that were not part of the first world, he was a natural.
Can I add a word about Yasser Arafat?
Please.
I just want to add a word for Farah. I can talk loud enough.
No, ये लेते हैं.
I just want to add for Farah, I had the opportunity of meeting Yasser Arafat on a number of occasions in my UNESCO life. And Yasser Arafat, in one of the many sessions that I had with him, he talked about Mr. Bhutto and the fact about the Islamic Summit, and that he was one of the key persons who had motivated, stimulated and encouraged Zulfikar Ali Bhutto to take leadership of the Islamic world, and said that you are the only person who can do it. And a very quick end to all that, his speech for the Islamic Summit was written by his speechwriter at that time, Yusuf Bhatt Sahab. And Yusuf Bhatt Sahab was a very dear friend of mine. And he sent me a 0 draft. And he said,
That's always what
comments?
it's called, yeah.
So this was no email, no internet, strange times, and you had to be very careful of what you said to the right or to the left, or you were looking around yourself all the time. And so I told Yusuf, I said, Yusuf, I have to come and give you my comment. And fortunately, we were both in Islamabad at that time. So I went to him and said, we want Mr. Bhutto alive. You cannot put these 2 lines into the Islamic Summit address. This is my sincere advice. And they were removed, those 2 lines, but the party was still over for him.
What were those 2 lines?
2 sentences.
Thank you so much. I'm going to have one last comment or question from Rafia Zakaria, because she is a fantastic writer. I'm so honored that she's here tonight. She's someone I really admire, and if any of you have not read her book, The Upstairs Wife, please read it. But she's also a contributor to the New York Times,
And
the
Indian
Guardian,
papers.
Dawn,
Indian papers also.
Indian newspapers. She's all over, and we are very fortunate to have her. Before I hand over the mic, of course, I'm sure Syeda knows that Oriana Fallaci interviews with history.
Yeah.
She interviews Mr. Henry Kissinger, and she asks him
So who do you think is the greatest statesman in the world right now? And he said, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto.
Can I just add something while you're talking about Oriana Fallaci, and then I'll come to you, Rafia. I want to say that I have also quoted from Oriana Fallaci in my book, but the other thing you said was Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger's quotation is that we will make a horrible example of him. So, you know,
For the nuclear.
yeah, I mean, like these, what can you say?
That is very American.
Yeah, yeah. And before I also want to say that I really think it's time that a biopic was made on Mr. Bhutto. And, you know, some of my friends have spoken to people like Gulzar and what's the name of your friend? In fact, you can intercede with him. No, yeah, of course, if Javed makes it. Vishal. Yeah. So it's time that a biopic was made. So he's your friend. So,
Okay, Rafia, come here.
come here.
I'll just stand. So thank you so much for your work, and it's been very, very fascinating to listen to both the discussion, some of the reminiscences of people. I come obviously from a post-partition generation and post-Bhutto generation. And for me, as for many others, the story of Bhutto has been sort of distilled through a variety of like political agendas that came after his execution. And so I'm curious to hear what you would say to people who have, like me, who have heard so many versions of that story, and that story used for such a variety of political agendas. Like what should they look for, and how should they sort of distill or understand this very, very, this very, very crucial moment in Pakistani history. So I'm just really curious that, and also just, in terms of, obviously I write for Dawn, so I would be interested in what you, if you had that audience, what you would say to them, both about, obviously what you've said in the book, but about this idea of how to read history of that moment. Thank you.
It's a tough question. Yeah, and you're read with a lot of interest in India also. So your columns appear in the Indian Express. And I've always thought of Rafia Zakaria must be some very elderly woman, and here you're a young girl. So it's very nice to know how your thoughts have evolved. I don't think that, if you look at the canvas of world leaders, I think especially South Asia, and why South Asia? Let's talk of world leaders. I think ZAB has, the quality of ZAB is something which is really unique. I mean, I can only say from really the primary sources that I've been so fortunate to have access to, his mind, his sway over all the people, his meticulous attention to detail, his world vision, his championing the cause of small states, his crying tears, and this is on record, that when he was passing and he saw the Haris breaking stones, there were tears flowing down his eyes, and Khalid bin Saeed asked him, historian, that how come you have such a soft heart, Mr. Bhutto, that you cry when you see the state of the poorest of the poor in your country? And he said very quietly, and it's quoted in my book and his book, that I get it from my mother. A son of a Hindu mother, and she was a dancer, and Sir Shehnawaz married her, and then she became Begum Khurshid Shehnawaz. So a woman in her own right of great stature. So I think what your generation has to look at him as in the galaxy of world leaders, and a man who was so tall, had to be hanged by the country that he gave his all for. And I think your generation, by maybe doing more research, there are only two books which have been written, this book and Stanley Walpert's book. And Stanley Walpert's book is, I can't judge it because that was the only biography, complete biography. So maybe more work needs to be done, maybe that the pride that Pakistan produced a Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, I think that has to be somehow come out of the inertia that is now gripping your country and our country. In our country, now the present regime is trying to cancel out the name of Nehru. If they could even cancel out Gandhi, they'll try to do it, but they can't. They need Gandhis because of the cleanliness thing, which is a big thing in our country. So Gandhi has essentially become Jhaduwala now. So I'm just saying that I think that pride, when your country has so much and there is so much to offer, and you have this towering personality, somehow to ingrain it, because everyone else who followed were just like, to me, they were just like cartoons almost compared to what Mr. Bhutto was. And Benazir never really got that stature at all. So really that's my feeling as a literature student, where you come from history, I come from literature. So that's how I feel. Thank you.
Beautiful. So, amazing. So what we are going to do now is you'll be tortured with one last share as I thank Syeda for a gorgeous evening. But I'm sure so many of you have questions. Please stay back while you have dessert. Ask Syeda all the questions you want. I mean, this is the most charismatic figure that was produced by South Asia. And the more we can learn about him, the better. One of my uncles was a poet. His name was Mazahir. Your Excellency.
Sorry.
Mazahir was Jafri. Qata. Sorry, it's in Urdu, I have to recite. इसने किसी को, उसने किसी को दिया है वोट. हमने जो मुस्तहक है उसी को दिया है वोट.
वाह वाह वाह.
और भुट्टो को वोट हमने मज़ाहिर नहीं दिया, हमने तो जुल्फ़िकार अली को दिया.
Very nice, very nice, very nice, very nice.
Wanted to see that smile on your face. Thank you so much, Syeda. What a brilliant evening. It has been simply inspiring listening to you. And what great ideas you've given to the young women and men in this room tonight. We really thank you and look forward to your visits again and again. Khuda Hafiz. Thank you.